7:15 in the morning, the East China Sea. The Chinese Type 052C destroyer Zhengzhou sat motionless in the deep gray waters. This was not a standard patrol. It was a scheduled maintenance stop for a routine hull inspection that was supposed to take 3 hours. A single discovery by a Navy diver would soon bring two nuclear powers to the edge of a conflict neither side was prepared to fight. The question was simple but terrifying. Who had placed a high-explosive-shaped charge on the hull of a frontline warship without being detected? The water was cold and dark 60 miles off the coast of Ningbo. Below the waterline, two divers moved slowly along the starboard side of the vessel. Their mission was to inspect the propeller shaft for cavitation damage. It was a mundane task. The lead diver swept his light across the steel plating near the ammunition magazine for the main gun. He stopped. He pointed his beam at a metallic cylinder attached to the hull. It was not a part of the ship. The device was approximately 30 centimeters long. It was held in place by 4 heavy-duty magnetic clamps. The lead diver reached out to touch the matte black casing, but stopped when he saw a small green light. The light was blinking every 5 seconds. This was a professional, military-grade shaped charge. It was designed to punch a hole through 6 inches of hardened steel and ignite the shells stored inside the ship. For some reason, the primary detonator had failed to trigger. 7:35 in the morning. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Zhengzhou, the atmosphere shifted from morning boredom to absolute focus. The captain stared at the grainy video feed from the diver's helmet camera. He did not need an expert to tell him what he was looking at. The ship was carrying a live, unstable explosive against its most vulnerable point. The captain spoke to his executive officer. Bring the ship to Condition 1. Silence all active sonar immediately. We do not know if this device is triggered by acoustic signatures. The officer responded quickly. Confirmed. We are going silent. Should I alert the East Sea Fleet Command? Negative, the captain said. Keep this on a secure, hard-wired line to Beijing. If the Americans or the Japanese detect our distress, the tactical situation changes. We are a sitting duck. 7:45 in the morning. 300 miles to the east, the USS Howard tracked the Zhengzhou on its long-range radar. The American crew noticed the Chinese destroyer had come to a complete halt in the middle of a primary shipping lane. This was highly unusual. The Zhengzhou was a high-value asset and rarely traveled alone. Yet, its escort was nowhere to be seen. The commanding officer of the USS Howard looked at the digital display in the center of the bridge. Why is he sitting still? We have no reports of engine failure. An analyst from the Electronic Warfare Suite replied, Sir, the Zhengzhou just went dark on all frequencies. They have cut their radar and their active sonar. They are trying to disappear while sitting in plain sight. The captain of the Howard adjusted his cap. Something is wrong over there. Adjust our course to Intercept. Let us see how close they let us get before they wake up. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 7:50 in the morning, Beijing, the Central Military Commission. The report from the East China Sea arrived at the command center like a lightning strike. High-ranking officers gathered around a wall-sized digital display. The icon representing the Zhengzhou was flashing amber. It was a status code, rarely seen in peacetime. It indicated a Tier 1 security breach. The ship was not just disabled, it was compromised. A senior admiral stood at the head of the long conference table. His voice was a low growl. How was an external device attached to a Type 052C destroyer while it was in a controlled maritime zone? Our acoustic sensors should have detected any submersible or diver within 2 kilometers. An intelligence officer stepped forward. Sir, the preliminary data suggests the device may have been attached while the ship was in port 48 hours ago. It was equipped with a pressure-sensitive delay. It only armed itself once the ship reached a depth of 40 meters. The admiral looked at the screen. And the Americans? The USS Howard is closing the distance. They are currently 12 nautical miles away and closing at 20 knots. They know we are dead in the water. 8:10 in the morning, the East China Sea. On the deck of the Zhengzhou, the tension was a physical weight. The crew had been ordered to stay away from the starboard side of the vessel. The silence was absolute. The engines were cut. The cooling fans were off. The only sound was the gentle lap of the waves against the steel hull. The ship's explosive ordnance disposal specialist arrived on the bridge. He was a man with 20 years of experience in underwater munitions. He carried a ruggedized tablet showing the high-resolution images taken by the divers. He pointed to the matte black cylinder. The specialist spoke to the captain. "Sir, this is not a standard naval mine. It is a miniaturized shaped charge with a dual redundant firing circuit. One circuit is a timer. The other is a magnetic sensor. If a steel hull moves away from it, it detonates. If another magnetic field approaches it, it detonates." The captain wiped sweat from his upper lip. "Can we remove it?" "Not without a stabilized crane and a neutral buoyancy chamber. If we try to pry it off, the magnetic release will trigger the fuse. We are tethered to this explosive." "And the green light?" the captain asked. "The green light means the primary timer has stalled. We do not know why. It could be a malfunction, or it could be a trap to lure us into a false sense of security." 8:25 in the morning. The USS Howard was now visible on the horizon. To the Chinese crew, the American destroyer looked like a predator circling a wounded animal. On the bridge of the Howard, the sensors were picking up something new. The tactical action officer called out to the captain, "Sir, we are detecting a massive surge in radio traffic from the Chinese mainland. At least 12 J-15 fighters have launched from the airbase at Ningbo. They are heading straight for this coordinate." The captain of the Howard looked through his binoculars at the stationary Chinese ship. "They are protecting something, or they are hiding something. Tell the crew to go to yellow alert. I want our phalanx systems online and our surface-to-air missiles warmed up. If those fighters cross the 10-mile line, I want a lock." The radio in the Howard's bridge crackled to life. It was a broadcast on the international hailing frequency. The voice was Chinese, speaking in clipped, professional English. "USS Howard. This is the Chinese Navy vessel Zhengzhou. You are entering a restricted military exercise zone. Turn to heading 090 immediately or you will be intercepted. This is your only warning." The captain of the Howard did not flinch. "They are lying. There is no exercise. They are terrified." 8:30 in the morning. The first pair of Chinese J-15 fighters screamed overhead at 5,000 feet. They did not fly past. They entered a tight banking turn directly above the two destroyers. It was a clear demonstration of intent. The sky was no longer empty. The situation was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a standoff. Deep below the waterline of the Zhengzhou, the green light on the black cylinder stopped blinking. It turned solid red. 9:15 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Howard. The blue glow of the radar screens reflected off the faces of 20 sailors. The room was cold. The air smelled of ozone and recycled oxygen. Every station was manned. The American ship was now only 8 miles from the Chinese destroyer. At this distance, the Howard sensors could count the rivets on the Chinese hull. The tactical action officer pointed to a new contact on the screen. "Sir, we have a second surface contact. A Chinese Type 054. A frigate has just broken cover from the Zhoushan Islands. It is moving at 30 knots. It will be on our flank in 20 minutes. The captain of the Howard leaned over the display. "They are building a wall. They want to push us away from the Zhengzhou." What is the status of the Chinese aircraft? 4 J-15 fighters are in a holding pattern directly above us. Their fire control radars are in search mode. They have not locked onto us yet, but they are ready. 9:30 in the morning. Inside the hull of the Zhengzhou, the sound of the red light was a silent scream. The EOD specialist watched the video feed from a remote-operated vehicle. The small underwater drone hovered inches away from the explosive device. The light was no longer green. It was a steady, unblinking red. The specialist spoke into his headset. "Captain, the device has transitioned to a proximity-fused state. I believe it has detected the ultrasonic pulses from our own hull sensors. It is no longer waiting for a timer. It is waiting for a physical or electronic trigger." The captain's voice was tense. "Explain the risk." "The USS Howard is approaching. Their active sonar is powerful. If one of their pings hits this casing with enough energy, It could vibrate the firing pin. We are no longer just a target. We are a lightning rod. If they get closer, they might accidentally detonate the charge themselves. The captain looked at the radar. If I tell them to stay back, I reveal our weakness. If I do not tell them, we all die. Send a signal to the approaching frigate. Tell them to interpose themselves between us and the Americans, no matter what. 9:45 in the morning. The USS Howard launched its Seahawk helicopter. The aircraft rose from the flight deck and banked toward the Zhengzhou. Its mission was to get a visual confirmation of the activity on the Chinese deck. The helicopter pilot stayed at 500 feet. He moved slowly. The pilot spoke over the radio. "Howard, this is Raven 1. I have eyes on the target. I see several crew members on the starboard rail. They look like they are deploying more cables. Wait, I see a drone in the water. It is a small yellow UUV. The controller on the Howard responded. Raven 1, maintain distance. We are seeing a Chinese fighter breaking formation. He is coming for you. One of the Chinese J-15 fighters dove from the clouds. It screamed past the Seahawk helicopter at Mach 0.9. The wake turbulence rocked the helicopter violently. The Chinese pilot was not trying to shoot. He was trying to knock the helicopter out of the sky with his engine wash. 10:00 in the morning. The situation had reached a tipping point. On the bridge of the Howard, the captain watched the Chinese frigate join the Zhengzhou. The two Chinese ships were now side by side. They formed a steel barrier. The captain of the Howard made a decision. We cannot wait for them to move. We need to know what they are hiding. Load the sonar buoy tubes. I want a full acoustic profile of that hull. If there is a submersible under there, I want to hear its heartbeat. The sensor officer hesitated. Sir, active sonar at this range will be seen as a hostile act. Do it, the captain said. Let them know we are looking. A massive pulse of sound left the USS Howard. It traveled through the water at 1,500 meters per second. It struck the hull of the Zhengzhou like a physical hammer. Deep under the waterline, the red light on the shaped charge began to flicker. The vibration was exactly what the device had been waiting for. 10:30 in the morning. The East China Sea. The impact of the sonar pulse from the USS Howard felt like a physical blow to the hull of the Zhengzhou. Inside the ship, the sound resonated through the steel frames like a massive tuning fork. On the exterior, the acoustic energy hammered against the matte black casing of the explosive device. The red light on the charge did not just flicker, it began to pulse rapidly, one flash every second. The Chinese explosive ordnance disposal specialist, Lieutenant Zhang, was already in his dry suit. He adjusted his mask and checked his breathing apparatus. He was one of the most highly trained divers in the East Sea Fleet. He knew that if the device detonated while he was within 10 meters, the hydrostatic shock would liquefy his internal organs instantly. Zhang spoke into his comms. I am entering the water. Maintain silence. Tell the bridge if the Americans ping us again, they will trigger the fuse. The controller responded. Understood. The captain is signaling the Howard to cease all active emissions. We are waiting for their response. 10:45 in the morning. Lieutenant Zhang descended into the shadow of the massive destroyer. The water was a murky green, filled with the hum of the ship's internal systems. He reached the midsection of the hull and stabilized himself using a vacuum grip tether. The device sat there, clamped to the steel. Up close, the craftsmanship was terrifying. This was a linear-shaped charge. It featured a precision-machined copper liner shaped into a perfect cone. Behind the copper sat approximately 6 kilograms of high-density plastic explosive. When triggered, the explosive would collapse the copper cone into a molten jet of metal traveling at 8,000 meters per second. It would pierce the hull of the Zhengzhou and enter the primary magazine for the 100mm main gun. The resulting secondary explosion would snap the destroyer in half. Zhang peered at the casing through his goggles. Command. This is not a homemade device. The housing is carbon fiber. The seal is vacuum tight. I see a fiber optic lead running from the detonator to a small sensor array. It is an anti-tamper circuit. If I try to block the sensor, It fires. If I try to cut the power, it fires. 1100 in the morning. On the bridge of the USS Howard, the captain watched the Chinese frigate move into a blocking position. The Chinese ships were now performing a delicate dance, shielding the Zhengzhou from any line of sight. The tactical action officer looked at his monitor. "Sir, the Chinese just sent a high-priority flash message on the bridge-to-bridge circuit. They are claiming they have an unstable underwater hazard. They are demanding we move back to 20 nautical miles. They used the word catastrophic." The captain frowned. "An unstable hazard. They are not saying it is a mine. They are saying it is a hazard. They want us out of the blast radius. Should we comply?" "No," the captain said. "If they are in trouble, we stay close enough to assist. But stop the sonar pings. If they are telling the truth, we do not want to be the ones who set it off." 11:15 in the morning. The sea state was beginning to rise. 6-foot swells moved through the area, causing the Zhengzhou to roll slowly. Every time the ship tilted, the stress on the magnetic clamps increased. Lieutenant Zhang felt the hull groan beneath his hand. He noticed something new on the device. Near the base of the clamps, a small serial number was etched into the carbon fiber. It was not in Chinese. It was not in English. It was a string of 12 digits, followed by a symbol of a stylized eagle. Zhang's heart hammered against his ribs. "Command, I have a serial number. It looks like a private security firm designation. But the eagle, that is the mark of the Black Sands Group. This is a mercenary-grade Sabo device." The realization changed everything. If this was not a government weapon, then someone was trying to start a war between two nations for profit, and the timer was still counting down. 11:45 in the morning. The East China Sea. A new radar contact appeared on the displays of every ship in the area. A Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force Pone patrol aircraft was approaching from the east. It was flying low, skimming the tops of the waves at 300 feet. The Japanese were not part of the official standoff, but the proximity of the incident to their territorial waters made them an uninvited guest. On the bridge of the Zhengzhou, the Chinese captain watched the icon move closer. His ship was still dead in the water. The explosive was still attached. The presence of a third nation's sensors made the situation even more volatile. The captain turned to his communications officer. "Signal the Japanese aircraft. Tell them they are entering a Chinese military exclusion zone. If they do not alter course, the frigate is authorized to use non-lethal deterrents." The officer nodded. The frigate Linyi is already painting the aircraft with its search radar. They are preparing the high-intensity strobe lights and acoustic hailing devices. 12:15 in the afternoon. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Howard, the captain stared at the data sent from the Zhengzhou's open-frequency broadcast. The mention of the Black Sands Group had reached the American intelligence suite. The name was familiar. They were a private maritime security firm known for operating in gray zone conflicts. They were expensive. They were deniable. The captain spoke to his executive officer in a hushed tone. If a private group put that charge on a Chinese destroyer, they did it to start a fire. They want the Chinese to think we did it, or the Japanese, or the Taiwanese. This is a false flag trigger. The executive officer looked at the tactical map. "Sir, the Chinese are not thinking about mercenaries right now. They see a Japanese plane and an American destroyer. Their rules of engagement are likely shifting to defend at all costs. If that Japanese pilot gets too close, the Linyi might fire a surface-to-air missile. If they fire, we have to respond. Change our posture," the captain ordered. "Move the Howard between the Japanese aircraft and the Chinese frigate. We are going to act as a buffer. Tell the crew to prepare for close-quarters maneuvering." 12:25 in the afternoon. The USS Howard increased speed to 30 knots. The massive ship leaned into a hard turn, its wake carving a white scar across the blue water. It moved directly into the path of the Chinese frigate Linyi. It was a dangerous game of chicken. Both ships were now less than 500 meters apart. Inside the Linyi, the fire control officers sat with their hands over the launch buttons. The tension was at its absolute limit. On the radio, the Chinese commander's voice was shaking with restrained fury. USS Howard, you are interfering with a legitimate defense operation. Move aside, or we will be forced to take kinetic action. The captain of the Howard responded personally. Lin Yi, we are preventing an escalation. There is a third party involved in this incident. We have reason to believe the device on the Zhengzhou was not placed by any state actor. Stand down and let us help you verify the signature. 12:30 in the afternoon. The response from the Chinese was not a radio message, it was a mechanical one. The Lin Yi's main gun turret rotated. The barrel lowered until it was pointed directly at the bridge of the Howard. At the same time, the sonar operator on the Howard shouted a warning. Captain, new contact. Multiple submerged signatures, high-speed screws. We have at least 2 Chinese attack submarines breaking baffle cover. They are flanking us from below. The American destroyer was now surrounded. To the front, a Chinese frigate with a loaded gun. Below, 2 submarines with torpedoes locked on. And behind them, a crippled destroyer carrying a bomb that could go off at any second. The ocean felt very small. The air felt very heavy. The silence on the radio was the most dangerous sign of all. Both sides had committed their forces. There was no more room to move. 12:45 in the afternoon. The electronic warfare suite on the USS Howard screamed. A steady, high-pitched warble filled the bridge. It was the sound of an S-band fire control radar locking onto their position. The Chinese frigate Lin Yi was no longer just pointing its main gun. It had engaged its targeting computer. It was calculating a firing solution for a terminal missile strike. The tactical action officer on the Howard shouted over the alarm. Lock. We have a hard lock. Lin Yi is painting our bridge. They are in the final stages of a launch sequence. The captain of the Howard did not blink. Do not break the lock. If we illuminate them back, we start a war. Maintain defensive posture. Ready the electronic countermeasures. 12:46 in the afternoon. Beneath the waves, the sonar operator on the Howard pressed his headphones tighter to his ears. A sharp, mechanical, metallic sound echoed through the dark water. It was a transient, the sound of a heavy flood valve opening on a Type 039G submarine. It was the last sound a crew heard before a torpedo was pushed into the water. The operator's voice was shaky. Transient. Submerged contact to the north has opened torpedo tube doors 1 and 2. They are flooded. They are ready to fire. 12:47 in the afternoon. Inside the cockpit of the Japanese Pone aircraft, the pilot saw his tactical display turn a violent shade of crimson. 2 Chinese J-15 fighters had moved into a combat spread directly behind his tail. They were within 3 kilometers. The Japanese pilot felt the vibration of the Chinese engines through his own seat. He pulled back on the control stick. He flared his engines. He was trying to break the infrared lock without deploying flares, which could be seen as an aggressive act. The pilot spoke into his mask. I am being pressured. They are forcing me toward the Zhengzhou. I cannot maintain this heading. 12:48 in the afternoon. The captain of the Howard stood at the center of his bridge. His jaw was set. His heart was a heavy drum in his chest. He looked at the weapon release panel on the console to his right. The plastic cover was flipped up. The safety keys were turned to the armed position. He looked at his executive officer. If they fire one shot, if one missile leaves a rail or one torpedo leaves a tube, we fire everything. We do not wait for permission from Hawaii. The executive officer nodded once. Understood, sir. All systems are at a 5-second response time. 12:49 in the afternoon. On the hull of the Zhengzhou, Lieutenant Zhang saw the red light on the explosive device stop pulsing. It became a steady, solid crimson. The vibration from the Howard's engines and the Lin Yi's maneuvers was too much. The hull was shivering. One of the 4 magnetic clamps began to slip. It moved 3 centimeters, scraping against the steel. Zhang spoke into his radio. His voice was a flat, terrifying monotone. It is moving. The device is falling off. The hull is too slick with biofouling. If it loses contact with the ship, the magnetic sensor will trigger. It will detonate in the water. We are all within the kill zone. 12:50 in the afternoon. The Chinese captain on the bridge of the Zhengzhou looked at his radar. He saw the American destroyer Howard turning its broadside toward the Linyi. He saw the submarines closing the circle. He saw the Japanese plane diving for the horizon. He realized that the world was about to end because of a 5-kilogram cylinder of plastic explosive that was currently sliding toward the seafloor. He did not call his admiral. He did not wait for Beijing. He picked up the fleet-wide emergency radio. He did not use code. He used the open international hailing channel. The captain's voice boomed through the speakers of every ship in the area. All stations, all nations. This is the Chinese Navy vessel Zhengzhou. The device is active. It is falling. We are abandoning the standoff. If you do not move your ships back 4,000 meters immediately, you will be caught in the blast. This is not a drill. Break your locks and run. 12:51 in the afternoon. Every screen and every combat information center showed the same thing. The Chinese frigate Linyi broke its radar lock. It turned so hard it listed 20 degrees to port. The USS Howard's engines roared as it went to flank speed in the opposite direction. The Chinese submarines began an emergency deep dive, venting air in a massive cloud of bubbles. The ocean was suddenly filled with the sound of retreating engines. The weapons were forgotten. The politics were gone. There was only the physics of the explosion that was coming. 1:15 in the afternoon. The East China Sea. The device slipped. Lieutenant Zhang reached for it. His fingers brushed the carbon fiber casing. He was too late. The heavy cylinder tumbled into the green abyss. It moved quickly. Zhang watched the red light descend. 10 meters, 20 meters. The Zhengzhou groaned. The ship was still moving away at 5 knots. Zhang spoke into his mask. It is away. It is sinking. Clear the area. 1:16 in the afternoon. The device reached 50 meters of depth. The pressure-sensitive fuse met its threshold. The magnetic sensor detected the mass of the Zhengzhou receding. Inside the casing, the primary capacitor discharged. There was no flash. There was no fire on the surface. Instead, a massive, muffled thud shook the ocean floor. A shockwave hit the hull of the Zhengzhou. It felt like a sledgehammer hitting a bell. Zhang was thrown back by the pressure. His vision went white. 1:17 in the afternoon. The water above the explosion site began to boil. A plume of white foam and dead fish rose to the surface. The Zhengzhou listed 5 degrees to starboard. The secondary magazine had not ignited. The ship was alive. But, on the bridge, the captain stared at his consoles. Every screen was frozen. Not black, frozen. A single image appeared on every monitor. A blue geometric pattern. It was not a Chinese system error. It was a digital intrusion. 1:18 in the afternoon. 3 miles away, the USS Howard was in the middle of its turn. The captain of the Howard gripped the rail. Status. Did it hit them? The tactical action officer did not answer. He was staring at his own screen. The Aegis combat system was unresponsive. The blue geometric pattern appeared on the American displays. The same pattern. The same time. The captain looked at his officer. Is this an EMP? Negative, sir. The lights are on. The engines are running. But the weapons. The weapons are locked out. We have no control. 1:19 in the afternoon. The Japanese Pone aircraft coasted through the sky. The pilot looked at his heads-up display. The targeting reticle for his defensive flares had turned into the same blue pattern. His radio was dead. His navigation was gone. He looked out the window. The Chinese J-15 fighters were no longer behind him. They were wobbling in the air. Their wings were dipping. They were struggling to stay airborne. Their fly-by-wire systems were being attacked. 1:20 in the afternoon. The ocean was suddenly, terrifyingly quiet. 4 warships, 2 fighters, 1 patrol plane. All of them were paralyzed. The explosion of the device had not been a weapon of destruction. It was a broadcast, a physical-to-digital bridge. The Black Sands serial number was a decoy. The device was a high-powered, short-range acoustic modem. It had used the water as a medium to transmit a zero-day virus into every hull within 5 miles. The fleets were no longer at war. They were hostages. Then, a new signal appeared on the emergency frequency. It was not Chinese. It was not American. It was a synthesized, genderless voice. This zone is now under neutral. Observation. All combat functions have been suspended. Maintain your current positions. Do not attempt to reboot your systems. The pivot was complete. The enemy was not in the water. The enemy was in the code. And for the first time in history, the two greatest navies on Earth were forced to rely on each other to survive. 1:30 in the afternoon. The East China Sea. The USS Howard was a drifting ghost. On the bridge, the captain watched as his navigation displays flickered between the strange blue geometric pattern and a series of scrolling lines of code. The code was not in any language the technicians recognized. It was a dense, non-linear architecture. The ship's engines were still turning at a low idle, but the rudder was locked 5 degrees to port. The destroyer was moving in a slow, wide circle. The captain turned to his executive officer. "Is there any manual override for the fire control?" The officer shook his head. "Negative, sir. The physical relays are being held open by the software. It is as if the ship's brain has been replaced. We can see. We can breathe. But we cannot fight." 1:45 in the afternoon. Inside the Zhengzhou, the situation was identical. The Chinese crew had attempted 3 hard reboots of the central processing hub. Each time, the system bypassed the BIOS and loaded the blue pattern within seconds. The virus was not sitting in the hard drives. It was resident in the firmware of the fiber optic cables themselves. It was a ghost in the wires. The Chinese captain stood on the open bridge wing. He held a pair of manual binoculars. He looked toward the USS Howard, 3 miles away. He could see the American sailors standing on their own deck, looking back. For the first time in 40 years, the 2 most advanced warships in the Pacific were reduced to 19th century technology. He spoke to his senior communications officer. "They have taken our satellites. They have taken our digital radio, but they cannot take the light." The officer understood. "The signal lamp, sir?" "Yes," the captain said. "Use the high-intensity Aldous lamp. Signal the Americans in international Morse code. Ask them if their status is the same." 2 o'clock in the afternoon. On the bridge of the Howard, a lookout shouted, "Sir, the Chinese destroyer. They are signaling with a light." The captain stepped out into the humid salt air. He watched the rhythmic flashes of white light from the Zhengzhou. Short, long, short. The signalman read it aloud. SOS. Systems dead. Are you the same? The captain of the Howard felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. Signal back. Affirmative. Systems hijacked by unknown third party. Suggest we share data on the device serial number. 2:10 in the afternoon. The exchange of light continued for several minutes. It was a surreal sight. $2 billion warships designed for hypersonic combat, communicating like sailing ships from the age of Napoleon. Through the flashes of light, the 2 crews began to piece together the puzzle. The Chinese had the serial number from the casing. The Americans had the acoustic signature of the modem broadcast. They realized that the Black Sands Group was only a front. The code appearing on their screens contained traces of a logic gate used only by a highly secretive non-state collective. It was a group that believed the only way to prevent a world war was to prove that military technology was obsolete. "Sir," the executive officer of the Howard whispered, "if this group can shut us down here, they can shut down the bases in Okinawa. They can shut down the command centers in Beijing. This is a global lockout." 2:15 in the afternoon. The synthesized voice returned to the emergency speakers on both ships. It was clearer now. It sounded almost disappointed. "You are communicating. That was not anticipated. Your cooperation is a variable we did not calculate." The captain of the Howard looked at the Zhengzhou. He saw the Chinese captain looking back at him. They were no longer enemies. They were a common problem for a new kind of power. The voice spoke one last time. The lockout will be released in 60 minutes. Use that time to consider the fragility of your machines. If you resume hostilities, the next shutdown will be permanent. We are watching. The blue pattern on the screens began to pulse. It was a countdown. 60 minutes to decide if they would go back to being rivals, or if they would find out who had just humiliated the two greatest navies on Earth. 2:45 in the afternoon. The East China Sea. The countdown on the screens reached 15 minutes. The blue geometric pattern pulsed like a slow, rhythmic heartbeat. On the bridge of the USS Howard, the silence was broken only by the sound of heavy breathing. The captain watched the Zhengzhou through his binoculars. The Chinese destroyer was no longer a target. It was a mirror. Both ships were victims of a superior, invisible force. The captain spoke to his executive officer. If the systems come back, if we get control, we do not arm the missiles. We do not lock our radar. We move to a distance of 10 nautical miles, and we wait for orders from 7th Fleet. The officer nodded. Confirm. We are going to a defensive posture. No aggression. 3:15 in the afternoon. The countdown hit 0. The blue pattern vanished. The screens on both ships flickered. Then they turned black. For 5 seconds, the ships were truly dead. Then, the hum of cooling fans returned. The consoles glowed with their standard tactical interfaces. The Aegis combat system on the Howard rebooted. The Chinese systems on the Zhengzhou did the same. The tactical action officer shouted, "Sir, systems are green. We have full control of the helm. Weapons are back in standby." The captain of the Howard looked at the radar. "And the Chinese? They are moving, sir. They are turning away. They are heading back toward the coast. They are not painting us." 3:30 in the afternoon. The Zhengzhou increased speed to 15 knots. It moved with a slow, heavy grace. The damage from the underwater shockwave was internal. Its electronic spine had been rattled. It needed a dry dock. It needed a total forensic sweep of its code. The Chinese frigate Linyi moved alongside its sister ship, acting as a physical shield. They were retreating. The Chinese captain sent one last signal, with the high-intensity light. Long, short, long. "We are departing. The ocean is large. Do not follow." The captain of the Howard watched the light fade. "Signal back. Safe passage. We are also departing." 400 in the afternoon. The two carrier strike groups that had been racing toward the back coordinate were ordered to stand down. The Japanese aircraft returned to its base. The Chinese fighters vanished into the haze over the mainland. The crisis was over. The physical threat was gone. But the ships felt different. The crews felt different. They had seen the edge of a new kind of war. It was a war where the most expensive weapons in the world could be turned into paperweights by a single string of code. The Howard turned to the south. The Zhengzhou turned to the west. Between them, the water was still boiling slightly where the Pfizer device had detonated. The sea would eventually hide the physical evidence of the shaped charge, but the digital evidence was now buried inside every computer. On both ships, the tactical incident was over. The strategic investigation was just beginning. 3 days later, Pearl Harbor and Beijing. The digital forensic teams worked in windowless rooms. They were not looking for a physical weapon. They were dissecting the remnants of the blue geometric pattern that had paralyzed two of the world's most advanced warships. In Hawaii, at the Pacific Fleet Intelligence Command, the air was cold and smelled of stale coffee. In Beijing, at the 3rd Department of the General Staff, the atmosphere was identical. Both nations were staring at the same ghost. The analysis was chilling. The code was not a product of a state laboratory. It lacked the rigid architecture of military software. Instead, it was organic. It was designed to adapt, to learn, and to vanish once its objective was met. The black sand serial number on the physical device had been a deliberate distraction. The real weapon was the acoustic modem that had turned the ocean itself into a transmission cable. Military analysts in both capitals reached the same conclusion. The device had not been intended to sink the Zhengzhou. It had been designed to create a situation where a single nervous finger on a launch button would trigger a global catastrophe. It was a test of human restraint against machine logic. 72 hours after the incident, the Zhengzhou sat in a high-security dry dock in Ningbo. Hundreds of technicians crawled through its interior, replacing miles of fiber-optic cabling. The ship was silent. Its captain had been debriefed for 20 hours straight. He sat in a small office overlooking the harbor. He was not being punished. He was being studied. He was the man who had chosen to break a military standoff to save his crew from a digital trap. His report was brief. He wrote that the greatest threat to modern warfare was not the speed of the missile, but the loss of human agency. When the screens went blue, the machines had decided the war was over. The humans simply had to catch up. 400 miles away, the USS Howard was moored at Yokosuka, Japan. Its crew was on mandatory leave, but the captain remained on board. He stood on the bridge, looking at the empty consoles where the blue pattern had pulsed. He thought about the moment he had seen the Chinese signal lamp. In that moment, the decades of geopolitical rivalry had evaporated. There was only the shared reality of two crews, trapped in a steel box with a timer. He spoke to his executive officer. "We were lucky. If the Chinese captain had been a different man, if I had been a different man, that device would have achieved its goal. It did not need to explode to destroy us. It just needed us to react." The executive officer looked at the calm water of the harbor. "Do we know who they are, sir? The ones who sent the message?" "No," the captain said. "And we likely never will." They proved their point. Our systems are interconnected. Our sensors are shared. Our vulnerabilities are identical. We are no longer fighting in a vacuum. The strategic assessment from the Pentagon was finalized that evening. It was marked with the highest level of classification. It stated that the East China Sea incident was a paradigm shift. The era of the unplugged war was over. Any future conflict would be moderated by a third party that lived in the code. The final paragraph of the report was the most haunting. It noted that during the 60-minute lockout, neither the Americans nor the Chinese had attempted to use their manual backup systems to fire on each other. When the technology failed, the humans had chosen peace. Modern warfare is often defined by the power to destroy, but on that Tuesday morning in the East China Sea, it was defined by the power to wait. The Zhengzhou and the Howard had come to the edge of the abyss and looked in. They did not like what they saw. The ocean returned to its natural state. The plumes of foam dissipated. The dead fish were swept away by the current. The physical evidence was gone. But in the server rooms of two superpowers, the blue geometric pattern remained. It was a silent reminder that the next time the screens go dark, the choice might not be theirs to make. The morning was finally quiet, and for now, it would stay that way.